Okay, so today we're embarking on a deep dive into something really quite fascinating, a paradox, actually. It challenges this core assumption many of us have that intelligence, well, that it always leads to good things for society. But our source material today suggests it might even be, in some ways, inversely linked to something incredibly fundamental: future generations. So, our deep dive today is all about unpacking this really complex, intriguing relationship between cognitive ability and fertility. We're drawing from the source material intelligence and fertility, a societal paradox. And our mission really is to get into the nuances of this societal paradox. We need to carefully pull apart correlation from causation, explore all the different drivers, social, economic, you name it, and maybe most importantly, figure out how society can maybe reframe this whole thing, see it less as a challenge and more as, well, an opportunity.
Yeah, and I think it's really crucial upfront to set expectations here. We're absolutely not talking about biological determinism, not at all. Instead, what we're looking at is this intricate interplay of social factors, economic forces, cultural norms, and psychological influences.
Mhm.
And the really important part, the hopeful part maybe, is understanding that because these are largely human-made forces, they can be changed, they can be reshaped.
Okay, so let's start unpacking the data then. What's the big picture? What are the global patterns we're actually seeing? You hear these stories like South Korea's fertility rate hitting what, 0.78, just incredibly low. Is that part of this pattern?
It absolutely is part of the pattern. That's a well-struck example. The trend is pretty clear across most developed nations. Individuals who score higher on intelligence tests, have more education, achieve more academically, they often tend to have fewer children.
Right. And that contrasts sharply with other regions, maybe where educational access is more limited.
Exactly. In those areas, families often tend to be larger. And the source material points to a specific finding. A one standard deviation increase in childhood IQ actually decreases the likelihood of becoming a parent later on.
Wow. Okay, so that sounds pretty direct, but you mentioned earlier it's not deterministic.
That's the crucial distinction. It's so important to hammer this home. This is correlation, not causation.
Got it.
It's not some fixed genetic destiny playing out.
Yeah.
It's heavily influenced by the context, by culture. And, this isn't an entirely brand new idea either. Charles Darwin himself, he made this intriguing prediction. He speculated that traits really useful for building a civilization might, in advanced societies, become kind of detached from reproductive success.
Interesting. So Darwin saw this coming in a way. Okay, so it's correlation driven by context. Let's get into that context. Let's pivot to the why. What are the big socioeconomic factors pushing this trend among more analytical or educated individuals?
Right, the practical reasons. There are several big ones. First off, the cost. I mean, raising children is just incredibly expensive.
Yeah, I saw that figure over $230,000 in the US just to get them to 18.
Exactly. It's a huge financial commitment. Then think about education. More education often means delaying entry into the full-time workforce.
Right, so you start earning later.
And then often people prioritize building their careers during what are biologically their peak fertility years.
Makes sense. You're focused on establishing yourself.
Add to that things like urbanization, city living, often changes family structures and support networks. And of course, easier access to reliable birth control gives people more direct control over timing and family size.
Okay, those are the big practical pressures. What about the mindset? The source mentioned something about analytical thinking.
Yes, it highlights how individuals who are perhaps more analytical might engage in more, let's say, overthinking around parenthood, a kind of detailed cost-benefit analysis, weighing the pros and cons very carefully.
Which could lead to hesitation, I imagine.
Definitely. And beyond just the practical costs, there's a strong psychological dimension too. There's a heightened awareness today of the risks involved in parenting.
And the standards seem higher than ever, right? What it means to be a good parent.
Absolutely. That can create immense pressure. It can lead people to delay having kids, wanting to be perfectly prepared, or even avoid it entirely.
The bar feels incredibly high.
It does. And there's also this concept the article calls expanded opportunity awareness. The idea is that intelligent, educated individuals often perceive a much wider range of possible life paths.
So parenting is just one option among many fulfilling choices.
Exactly. It's not necessarily seen as the primary path to a meaningful life, but one of several possibilities. This contributes to that tendency to wait until they feel completely ready.
Which might be never for some.
For some, perhaps, yes. That perfectly ready moment might always seem just out of reach.
Okay, so we have these socioeconomic pressures, these psychological factors, but you mentioned context is key. Let's look at Sweden. The source uses it as an example of how things can be different. How do their policies change the equation?
Sweden is a really powerful counterexample, actually. It shows this isn't inevitable. They've implemented really comprehensive family-friendly policies. We're
Mm.
talking generous, paid parental leave for both parents,
Right. That's key.
heavily subsidized, high-quality childcare, flexible work options becoming much more the norm.
And what's the result in terms of this trend we're discussing?
The outcome is striking. High IQ men in Sweden are actually 25% more likely to become fathers by the time they're 40 compared to, say, similar cohorts in less supportive environments.
Wow. So policy really can make a difference. It demonstrates it's about the system, the support structures, not just the individual's traits.
Precisely. It shows how cultural context and government policy can fundamentally reshape these outcomes. And this also maybe broadens our discussion about intelligence itself and even evolution.
How so?
Well, intelligence isn't just one thing, right? It's multidimensional. We talk about analytical intelligence, the stuff IQ tests measure, but there's also emotional intelligence, creativity, practical intelligence.
All crucial in different ways.
Absolutely. And evolutionary success, long-term, isn't solely tied to high IQ scores. Adaptability, social skills, emotional intelligence, these are hugely important too. And looking ahead, with AI potentially taking over more analytical tasks, maybe traits like creativity, empathy, complex problem solving in unpredictable situations, maybe those become even more valuable from an evolutionary perspective.
That's a fascinating thought, shifting values. Now, before we get too far into solutions, it feels really important to address a warning the source gives. It strongly condemns any eugenic interpretations of these findings. Can you speak to that?
Yes, absolutely crucial. The source material is very clear on this point. It emphasizes strongly that intelligence is not purely genetic. It's heavily influenced by environmental factors.
Like what kinds of factors?
Things like nutrition, quality of education, access to healthcare, a stable and stimulating home environment. All these play a massive role.
So seeing these fertility trends is absolutely not a justification for any kind of social engineering.
Not in any way, shape, or form. No coercive policies, no attempts to dictate reproductive choices based on these correlations. The focus should always be on supporting individual choices and creating equitable opportunities, not manipulating demographics.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. It's essential. So if the environment and systems do matter so much, and we look at places like Sweden or France is often mentioned too, what are the tangible solutions? What steps can societies actually take if they want to make it easier for thoughtful, educated people to also choose parenthood?
Well, drawing from those successful models, like in France and Scandinavia, it really boils down to a combination of policy and culture. On the policy side, it's about normalizing truly family-friendly approaches.
So like the things that you mentioned for Sweden.
Exactly. Making generous parental leave the standard. Significantly subsidizing high-quality childcare and early education to reduce the financial burden. And creating flexible academic and career structures. Things that don't force people into this harsh binary choice between career ambition and having a family.
Right, avoiding that mommy track or daddy track penalty.
Precisely. But policy alone isn't enough. Cultural change is equally critical.
What does that look like?
It means actively celebrating intellectuals, academics, professionals who do choose to parent, making it visible. It means starting to redefine parenthood not just as responsibility or limitation, but as something potentially stimulating, enriching, growth-promoting in itself.
Shifting the narrative.
Shifting the narrative. And ensuring our institutions, universities, workplaces, genuinely stop making career progression and family life feel like they're mutually exclusive goals. You should be able to pursue both.
This really brings us to some big philosophical questions, doesn't it? Questions the article raises for you, the listener, to think about, like, should civilization consciously structure itself to make sure that traits like intelligence, analytical thinking, creativity can thrive alongside reproductive success, not in opposition to it? Can we actually rebuild parts of society to allow both, genius and future generations to flourish together?
Or, put another way, are we maybe misdiagnosing this whole thing? Seeing it as some kind of permanent biological trend.
When actually it's a social issue, a set of problems that we created and therefore that we can potentially solve.
That's the crux of it. And interestingly, this is where technology, especially AI, might offer a surprising note of hope.
How could AI play a role in this specific paradox?
Well, think about the practical pressures we discussed. AI tools could offer real-world help. More sophisticated AI could enable truly flexible, effective, remote work options, making it easier to integrate work and family life.
Okay, I can see that.
You could have smart home systems or AI assistants helping with childcare logistics, scheduling, maybe even monitoring.
Reducing some of that daily friction.
Exactly. Think about AI tutors potentially easing the educational demands on parents, providing personalized support for kids. Or advanced health monitoring, reducing some of the anxiety that comes with parenting newborns, for example.
So the idea is that technology might actually help alleviate some of the specific burdens that seem to disproportionately affect the choices of highly analytical individuals.
That's the suggestion from the source, yeah.
Yeah.
That these kinds of innovations, by reducing the perceived costs and stresses, might actually help resolve this intelligence fertility paradox,
Yeah.
maybe even within a few decades. It's a hopeful outlook.
So wrapping this up then, the core takeaway seems pretty clear. Rather than getting anxious about demographic shifts potentially linked to intelligence, society actually has the power to adapt. We can use smart policies, embrace helpful technology, and crucially, work on shifting cultural attitudes.
Absolutely. And
Not-
that final message from the article is quite powerful, I think. It really emphasizes that human intelligence and reproductive success are not inherently opposed. They can absolutely coexist. Yes, and it's a big if. If societies are consciously and thoughtfully designed to support both, it requires deliberate effort.
Which leads us to the final thought for you, our listener. Thinking about your own world, your community, your workplace, what concrete steps could be taken there? How could we better celebrate and support thoughtful, analytical, creative individuals who want to balance their own intellectual growth with raising a family? How do we make sure that choosing one doesn't feel like sacrificing the other? This article really, it serves as both a philosophical and a scientific call to action. Not about dictating anyone's choices, obviously, but about creating the conditions. Creating a society where thoughtful individuals feel genuinely free and supported to choose family life without feeling they have to compromise their personal or intellectual growth. Something to definitely mull over.